want a style of card making that is simple, accessible, and fun to do without leaving you a pile of scraps to figure out what to do with in the future. Hi, I'm Jess from jesscrafts.com, and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So today I am going to share with you how to make 20 cards without any pattern paper scraps. It's going to be very easy, step-by-step directions, very prescribed in terms of cut these here, cut that, I have done another class in the past, 15 cards in 1 hour. They were holiday cards, but you could use them for other occasions. And that was very, very beginner friendly. This is kind of like a little bit of a step up from that course. So if you've never made cards before, I would check that one out and maybe adapt it to Valentine's Day if that's why you clicked on this video. But today I'm going to focus on a little bit different. I'm going to do 20 cards. Some of them are going to be A2 cards and some of them are going to be slimline because I thought that'd be fun to introduce a new type of card. And I'm going to add a little bit more in terms of there's going to be more designs. The last class just had 2 designs. So this one, you'll want to follow a little more closely along. And I would, again, just get your feet wet with that other course if you haven't made cards before. But I think that even if you haven't, there's a lot of clear directions in this one. And you'll be able to be successful. So I'm gonna walk you through the materials that we're going to need for this class. Let's head over to the table and check it out. So we're gonna make 20 cards from 10 sheets of 6x8 pattern paper. I have an entire pack of 6x8 pattern paper, which includes 36 sheets. You won't need all of that. So if you already have a pack of 6x8 pattern paper that you have used a few sheets from, you can still just pull any 10 sheets. Now, most of them can be directional, and what I mean by that is they can have a clear top and bottom like this sheet does. If I turn it on its side, it looks a little funny. A few of the sheets, and we'll go through this in more detail, need to be non-directional. So like this dot paper, it doesn't particularly matter if it is facing up or down. And it can be single-sided paper. I wanted to do that because I think that it gives you more options. You could, of course, also cut down some larger sheets of pattern paper to 6x8. So anyway, I wanted to be flexible in terms of not being so restrictive, like you could only have non-directional pattern paper or you had to have double-sided, because we're gonna do a lot of mixing and matching across sheets of pattern paper. So the double-sided is less necessary. I share a lot of paper busting templates, and what those paper busting templates mean making cards without scraps like we're doing today. But a lot of times it's taking one sheet of paper and turning it into 2 to sometimes like 6 cards if it's a 12x12 piece of pattern paper, or maybe a little more. But this time, because we're gonna mix the patterns, it's gonna be a little bit different than my typical paper busting templates. So, I have picked out this pad, I'll pick out 10 sheets, and then we're going to need 12 sheets of white 8.5 by 11 cardstock, and those are what we are going to turn into our card bases. We're going to need 5 sheets of coordinating 8.5 by 11 colored cardstock for the mats. You might pick 5 sheets of the same color, or you might need to pick different colors in order to coordinate well with the paper that you choose. However, I do provide cardstock cutting templates, which I'll talk a little bit about more in a second, and which is something I haven't always done in the past, or I actually don't know if I've ever done in the past. And so they're going to show you how to cut it out of cardstock, and in that case it will be more helpful to have all the same color, but you can be flexible with that. You'll probably need a coordinating color of ink and a stamp set for sentiments, but of course you could leave sentiments off and not use them. And then would need a stamp block to stamp on if you're going to use that. I am asking for some coordinating embellishments. So in the case of having coordinating embellishments, you might decide you don't need sentiments because your coordinating embellishments might have sentiments on them already. I have quite a few that do. So that's why it's, kind of an optional thing. You're gonna, of course, need a paper trimmer to cut all of this paper, some adhesive to glue it down. I recommend I use Scotch ATG. I think there are other great ones out there. I do like tape rollers personally, but also Bearly Art is a great liquid glue. And it's nice to have both on hand because sometimes with the smaller embellishments, you might want to just put a little liquid glue on the back instead of using your tape runner. What I mean by a tape runner, I do want this to be beginner friendly. We'll talk about it a little bit later in the video too. It's something that like you pull it along and it leaves a strip of tape behind. Okay, and I think that we've got everything. There is an optional PDF that you can purchase to go with this class. I think you can follow along with this video and get everything you need for free, essentially. Like make it a free class by just writing down all the measurements and following along closely. But perhaps you'd rather have these materials. So you'll see these throughout the video. And again, you could take a freeze frame or whatever, and you can just look at these. But if you would like to just have them as a printable PDF, it'll also include like a supply list. It'll include step-by-step directions, kind of like stepping out each thing so that you don't need to watch the video again. And it will include patterned paper cutting templates. So it will show you how to cut each of the 10 pieces of pattern paper. It tells you how many sheets to cut using that template. And then, in addition to those, you will get the card sketches, and it tells you, okay, we're gonna make 2 of this card, and it will have all the sizes that you need. It will tell you what paper template you got that piece of paper from, and it will tell you the mat sizes, all the details, like I said, how many you'll make. So it'll make it really, really clear. Okay, and then the final thing, and like I said, I don't think I've ever done this before, cardstock mat cutting templates. People have asked about these before. I do not guarantee no cardstock scraps. I guarantee no pattern paper scraps, and I'll show you what to do with any extra cardstock you might have. But I find cardstock scraps much easier to deal with and also much easier just to recycle if I need to. When I get pattern paper scraps, I always want to use it. I love pattern paper, and so I'm always like, oh, I'll hold on to it for the next project. Anyway, this will show you how to cut a 8.5 by 11 piece of paper or a piece of cardstock to get the mats that you need. It will tell you, what card they go on for sketch 1, how many you need, etc. The blue spaces are the scraps that will be left over. So as you can see, very small amount of scrap there. Here, there's a little bit bigger of a scrap piece, great for sentiments, small scrap. And then this last one does have a large amount of scrap, but again, because so many people have asked for cardstock mat cutting templates in the past, I wanted to provide that. So that is all part of a PDF. There's a link in the video description that will bring you to the Etsy shop so you can purchase it. It's relatively inexpensive. There's a little coupon code even, so that you can pick that up and help you to follow along with the class. Another supply you will need are circle and oval dies. You could potentially use just one or the other. I'm going to call for both circle and oval dies because you are going to cut out of the center of a pattern paper. You could potentially trace a circle or trace an oval and then cut it out with a pair of scissors, but that is considerably more challenging to do. So if you already have dies, I would recommend using them. And if you don't have circles or ovals or not both, you can use other shapes, but I really suggest a set of layering dies where they get progressively bigger. So you could potentially use squares, hearts, trying to think like rectangles, different things that could come in increasing sizes because you're going to need to cut the pattern paper and the mat out of one size and then one size larger. I have a few more optional supplies that might be helpful, a scoring board and scoring tool in order for you to make your card bases, which I'll talk briefly about, and organizing envelopes can be helpful, particularly if you get the PDF, although even if you're making notes, so you can put all of the things that you need for card sketch 1 all together so that as you're cutting things, you're not losing all of your pieces and they're staying sorted. So as I'm following this patterned paper cutting template, as I cut something, I'm going to want to start organizing it into the cards it's going to make. And so I'll talk a little bit about that, but you don't have to do that, especially if you're going to try to craft all in one session, but I find it to be pretty helpful. So the first thing you're going to need to do is cut your card bases. I went over this in a lot of detail in the last one. We'll go a little more quickly through it this time. I do have a video on my channel that talks about cutting A2 card bases specifically, but I'll briefly review each one. We're going to start with one piece of 8.5 by 11 cardstock, and we're going to cut it in half to 5.5. So it'll be 5.5 by 8.5. We're going to make 16 cards this way, but each piece of cardstock makes 2 cards. So when I've cut it in half, now I have enough for 2 cards. So I'm going to cut 8 sheets like that. And then once I have this 5.5 by 8.5. I'm keeping my hand here a little awkwardly, but just because my camera will tend to unfocus when it has just a white thing to look at. So, like, you know, pure white, like the card base here. So I then, see, I did it. Sorry about that, guys. So then I'm going to score it. I'm going to score it at 4 1/4. My scoring board happens to have the A2 line marked. So that is at 4 1/4. And I will run the bone folder down that. Now, if you don't have a bone folder and scoring board because you're newer to card making and you weren't sure you were ready for that investment yet, not that they're very expensive, but just, you know, if you're not going to make cards again, it won't be a good idea. So I fold it in half, and now I have one A2 size card. I'll do that 15 more times. Or if you don't have the scoring board, you could just fold the card in half. I recommend accent opaque 100-pound cardstock for card bases. There are a couple great options out there. You probably can find some thick cardstock even at a big box store that might suit you well. I will link all the products that I use though, just because I think that that can be helpful if you're curious. So we'll do that till we have 16 A2 size cards. For the slimline cards, a slimline card is just a long skinny card, and we want it to be 3.5 by 8.5. So what that means is we're going to cut it to 7 by 8.5, because when we fold 7 in half, it'll be 3.5. Now this does leave us a chunk of cardstock here. This cardstock is great for stamping sentiments and for using for a whole variety of things. We'll talk a little bit more about that later in the class, but I do want to acknowledge, yes, this is a scrap of cardstock. So, but we're talking about patterned paper scraps. My scoring board is a little bit small. It's not quite 8.5 long. So when I go to score a slimline card, as mentioned, I want it at 3.5. This is also sometimes, like, there's a 4-bar card that also gets scored at 3.5, but that's not what I'm doing today. But that, you do see that marking there on my scoring board. So I'm going to go to that 3.5, halfway between, and I'm going to run that scoring line down. In this case, because my scoring board is not long enough, I just flip it over and I can continue to score from the other side at that 3.5 mark, and then I can fold it, or like we talked about before, you can just fold it, you know, just meet the 2 corners. It's a little bit trickier with this longer piece of paper, but it's definitely doable. So you're gonna make 4 cards like that. You'll have 16 A2 and 4 slimline. If you want to use the organization method that I like to use, what I'm going to do is take each card sketch, which is printed out on an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, and slip it in one of these. And then I see it makes 2 cards. So I'll want to make sure I put 2 A2 card bases inside. Then for a different example, if I go to the slimline cards, it makes 2. I will slip the 2 slimline cards inside, and I'll keep going till I have one of these envelopes for each of my card sketches, and I've put the cards inside so that I've kept track of where they need to go. Next up, we pick our 10 sheets of 6 by 8 pattern paper. The pattern paper pack I have, like I said, has 36 sheets. There are 2 of each of 18 different designs. So it has actually quite a bit of variation in it. So in this today, I have actually picked 10 different pattern papers from this collection because I could. I am going to cut off this branding strip on the top of all of them so that they'll be 6 by 8. I have made sure to pick a variety that are directional and non-directional so that I can follow the prompts on the pattern paper cutting templates and throughout the video to know if I'm going to need one or not. The first pattern paper cutting template asks you to cut 5 sheets of pattern paper to 3 by 4. And you might have a 6 by 8 patterned paper that is made up of 4 blocks of 3 by 4. And they often, if you get some one of those, and I've used those before in the past, they're super fun because they make really easy cards. They might have, a 3 by 4 box, and it might have a little design and a sentiment and all that. Those will be able to be used on almost every single card. Those would be great. I could not find a current Valentine's paper when I had to order that did that. But if you have that, go ahead and use it. And I might, show this again in the future. Or I might have another example, like non-holiday or non-Valentine themed with that, so you can see it. If you're like, don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. But all of the 3 by 4s can be directional. So they can all have a clear top and bottom because they are going to be used in that way. But some of them are going to have a circle on top, and that's the case where those 3 by 4 cut aparts may not be as useful. If your paper had these branding strips, you might think, oh, that's pattern paper scraps, I want to use those. Great. The general recommendation I would have for these, and yours might not have had them, so it might not have mattered, would be you could stamp sentiments on them, and you can use that to further embellish your cards. Or you can do something as simple, and these might need to be trimmed down a little bit more because sometimes I don't trim exactly on the line. This was perforated, so I'm pretty sure it was perforated. Yeah, it was perforated, so you could have like bent it back, but I like to have a really smooth edge. So what you can do with these is just kind of cut it at an angle and place that on the inside of your card as embellishment, and then that gets rid of the scraps. I'm not going to count these as scraps because not every 6 by 8 pattern paper collection even has them. Okay, so my first pattern paper cutting template says cut 5 sheets of 3 by 4. This can be directional. This is my rough copy. I noticed it doesn't specifically say that it can or cannot be directional, so I'll make sure that that gets added for you guys. So I've picked 5 of my patterns, and I actually decided to go with some of my most bold patterns because these are going to be my focal points. So I've cut off my branding strips, and not every pattern paper is even going to have these strips at the top. They're not even branding strips, actually. That's what they sometimes call it on 12 by 12 paper because they'll say like the name of the brand. But this is just kind of like where you could hang it in a display or something. And so what I would do with these is if you want to use them up, I would just kind of cut them on a little bit of an angle, kind of make a little bit of a banner shape, really easy. And then I would do one of 2 things with them. I would stamp a sentiment on them. This one may be a little bit busy for a sentiment, but this one would be great for a sentiment, and use that to embellish my cards here. Or I would just take this little strip and I would put it on the inside of my card as a little extra embellishment, a little pop of pattern paper. There are going to be, if you cut them just like I showed you there, I had 10 pieces of pattern paper, so I can get 2 from each one of these strips, and then I'll have one of these little strips for each card, so I can just easily pop them into the finished cards. Or like I said, use them as your sentiments. Now, my first cutting template for pattern paper says that you need 5 sheets using this template. They can all be directional, as previously mentioned. And I notice on here, because this is my rough draft, it doesn't specifically say that. So I'll make sure that I also add that note because I think it's pretty important. Okay, so I have picked not always my most bold patterns. So these are going to be, oftentimes, this is going to be the focal point where I put my embellishment, where I put my sentiment on a card. And while I think often these bolder patterns could look great for that, you might not really see an embellishment on all of this busyness. So I've decided to go with some of my more subtle ones, and I've picked some that are directional and some that aren't. It doesn't particularly matter because they can be. So then I will take all 5 sheets and I will start by cutting them to 3 by 8. You can cut more than one sheet at once if your paper trimmer can handle it. And then I'll cut it in half again at 4. And I will do this to all 5 sheets of pattern paper. Now you could, every single card needs one of these. You could already take your folder, you have your envelope, and you could say, okay, I'm gonna just decide that Card Sketch 1 is getting these two and toss them in there. This is particularly fine if you are working with like a collection like I am where most things will match together. However, I would probably recommend just cutting these all and leaving them to the side for now because you're going to be cutting more pattern paper that's going to mix with these. And so you might want to decide later which ones will mix well. So I'll cut all of these, all 5 sheets to 3x4 and come back for the next. Pattern paper cutting template B should be non-directional pattern paper. We're going to take this piece of the pattern and we're going to change it and put it on its side here. And we're going to use this, as it says, for sketch 1 and then this for sketch 6. The circle here, the directionality doesn't really matter, but for sketch 1 we're going to need that. So we're going to use these 2 pieces for sketch 1 and therefore we're going to pick a non-directional pattern paper and then we'll be able to pick which of the 3x4s we want to go with it potentially. So as it calls for, I am going to start by cutting it to 4 by 6 inches. Then that 4 by 6 inch piece gets cut to 5 1/4, which leaves me with a 3/4 by 4 inch piece. Do the same to the other side, and then it calls for me to get those circle dies that we mentioned in our supplies, and we're going to cut out a circle that's about 2 1/2. Now you can measure to exactly 2 1/2, but if you're just using a set of dies, you're probably just going to want to pick whichever die is closest to that. So this one here is, I'm looking, 3 to 5, that's 2 inches. It's pretty close to 2 1/2. So I'm going to need to take out this die, and then I'm going to set aside this slightly bigger version, but you can also leave it on there and just leave it blank because you'll know the slightly bigger one, but you're gonna need this later when you're doing your cardstock. So I just wanted to highlight that. And then what I'll do is I'll tape this down into the center as it shows, because this is gonna get covered up in the final card. So we're gonna just cut this circle out of the center and we're gonna do that on both of them. We are only cutting 1 sheet of paper this way. Once I have these pieces cut out, I saw on the pattern, the template told me that these go with sketch number 6. I have all my sketches, there's 9 of them, so I have 9 of these envelopes, and I have them in order, so I'm just gonna slip this in here. I'm not even gonna worry about closing this envelope because I'm gonna keep putting things in here, and it's a little bit less frustrating to not have to open it every time, plus I can then stack them up. And so all the edges are right here. And they're open like that and stacked. Now this is for Card Sketch 1. And I'm gonna stop and go, okay, well this is going to be Card Sketch 1. And I know that these are gonna be layered together. I need to pick one of these that I think will coordinate well with this background. Sorry, it's hearts on this side. And okay, the hearts kind of stand out because they're both pink, but they have the white. And I'm not gonna talk about every little choice that I make here, but I do wanna share some of them. I can also say, oh, this is a pretty subtle background paper, so maybe I really want to have it punch, like a pop of this flower. So I actually think that I do like that choice. Now I can always go back and change this later, but now I've picked out, since they're going to make 2 cards, I've picked out the 2 3x4s that we need to go. And I'm going to be able to keep going with that process so that I have all of my paper organized at the end. Pattern paper cutting template C can be directional. You're only going to cut one of these as well. I know that it's going to be the background, so I'm going to cut it a nice long piece to be the background of one of the slimline cards, and then this circle piece is going to be cut in half and used across a card. So I kind of think about those things. I kind of familiarize myself with the sketches and how things turned out before picking my pattern paper, but I realize if you're trying to follow along that might be a little harder, so I'm just kind of trying to point those things out. So the oval will be used for sketch 7. So first start by cutting this in half to 3x8. Then we're going to take an oval. I am suggesting an oval that is 2 3/4 by 3 3/4. And the important thing is the oval is not longer than the 3x4 piece that you're going to put over it. So since we're going to cover the hole the oval makes with our 3x4, we just can't have it be any bigger than that or so wide that doesn't fit on the pattern paper. But you can adjust the size a little bit depending on what you have. So we'll run that through the die cut machine. and we'll do that twice. Or when you're die cutting it, that you die cut it at the part of the card that it's going to cover up. So in the sketch, we will see that I'm recommending the rectangle go on the bottom. Now, if you accidentally put it in the middle or the top, you're going to be able to make it work. You're just gonna have to put your 3x4 in the same spot. But that is how I'm calling for it. And I realize this paper is actually not directional, but if you did have directional pattern paper, it's especially important. And then you're later on going to cut a mat that is slightly bigger, so you'll need those oval dies. Again, this is going to be part of sketch 2, or yes, sketch 2, which I just showed you. So again, I can go right now and pick the 3x4 pattern paper that I think will work well. That one looks pretty cute. But again, you can see pretty much any pattern that I pick is gonna look great. That's why I said if you do just kind of put your 3x4s away, you don't really have to worry about it. But you are only gonna make 2 of this one. These ovals will go in the envelope for sketch 7 as labeled, and so you will put these in there, or put them aside, maybe in a pile with all the other things for 7. Pattern paper cutting template D needs to be non-directional because you're going to take the paper, the strips that you cut here, and turn them on their side for the card. So if I show you, if I cut it out a strip here and I turned it on its side, those will look funny. It's not what we want. So I'm picking a non-directional pattern paper for cutting template D. Cutting template D tells me to cut to 5 1/4 by 8. Then we're gonna take this and we're gonna cut 2-inch strips off it. So to 6, to 4, and to 2. Then this last remaining strip gets cut in half. It's 3/4 wide, so it'll be 3 1/4 by 4. Now, these are actually some of the few pieces that are not going to call for mats. You actually can put mats on them if you want. And if you, this paper has a good amount of white space, so if you personally think that it's not going to stand out enough on the white, then you could put a mat around it, like I said, or you could pick a pattern paper that is just a little bit more solid. Like for instance, this blue would clearly look good without a mat. So these are all going to go aside, and they're going to be for template, or sorry, sketch 3. And again, there's going to be, there's going to be 4 of them. And so I can go ahead and pick my 3x4. In this case, I might pick these blue hearts because I think that this paper is pretty gender neutral here. And so maybe it'd be nice not to add any pink to the mix here and go with the blue. And I mean, I guess there's a little bit of pink in that background, but not pink it up too much because I did choose a lot of pink. This collection is a little girly, whatever, you know, that means, because there's plenty of girls who don't like pink and there's plenty of boys who do like pink, but you know, so then I'll add these into sketch 3, both the 3x4s and those other pieces. And then these here are for sketch 4. So I'll slip that into that. Sketch 4 actually makes 1 card, and these are the 2 extra pieces of pattern paper. The only other thing remaining is this 3x4. So I can just pick one of my 3x4s and add it in there with sketch 4, and everything I need for sketch 4 is now complete. This is cutting template E. You're going to do just 1 sheet out of this, and this can be directional because the way that you're going to use the remaining pieces, they're going to stay in that direction. Now, these are like some kind of thinner strips. They're only 3/4 of an inch wide, and so that is something you might want to consider. So here I look, if I were to make a 3/4 inch strip, which I'm just using this paper to kind of cover it, like this is all you would see. That might feel like a little bit of a waste of a bolder pattern paper like this. One of the other sheets that I have left are these roses. And similarly, I could see, what does 3/4 strip of this rose paper look like? Something else is that this is not going to get a mat. So it's going to need to be a pattern paper that I am okay with it just sitting on top of the card. I think even though I do sometimes prefer a bolder pattern paper, if I'm not going to use a cardstock mat, I think these roses will work. I think either of these will look great. So, but just something I want to highlight for you, for those who, you know, maybe do have a stronger opinion on that kind of thing. So I'm going to pick this darker background paper and hope that my roses work well for my next one. And if they don't, that's okay. I can go ahead and pick another pattern paper for my collection. I haven't cut any of them yet, so there's no commitment. I'm going to cut this to 1.5, so I'm going to go from 6 to 4.5, but you can go down to the 1.5 measurement. And I'll need this to cut soon. And then I'm going to cut these at 3/4 inch wide. I actually should have cut the 3/4 inch wide first. I'm going to regret this in a moment because cutting a 1.5 inch strip to 3/4 is not the easiest thing to do on this particular paper trimmer, but there's plenty of paper trimmers where it is easy peasy to do. In this paper trimmer, this edge of the blade is at about 3/4, so I'm going to make it work, but there isn't even a measurement for 3/4, you'll see. So that was a mistake on my part. I could go to another paper trimmer, but we're already in the process here. And so then I'm going to cut the 1.5 to 4. So it's 1.5 by 4. So the 1.5 by 8 to 4. Oops, sorry, I'm throwing things here. Okay, so these strips are going to be kind of used as is. We're going to use 3 of them on a card. This is going to be for sketch 5. We just finished sketch 4. I'm going to try to make these all kind of in order and pretty straightforward to follow. So we'll pick 3 of these. You can pick the ones that were cut next to each other. So like if you want to kind of piece them back together and find out which one, like these 2 fit back together. So if you want the ones that fit together, great, do that. If you don't want them, if you explicitly want them to look mixed up, then, you know, pay attention to that as well. And then there, as you see, there are no mats around them, and then they need a pattern to go with them. That's pretty bold, which kind of looks nice with it. But I do also notice that I only have 2 of each of these left, so maybe it'd be good to use them up. Maybe something subtler would look nice and kind of let the black stand out. Or we just go really, really bold completely with this card. I'm not sure I like that. I think I do prefer, if anything, the subtler look. Okay, so that's all for sketch 5. We'll put that in this envelope. And then this other one is for sketch 6. We already have this circle cut for sketch 6. This is why it's good to kind of revisit things as we go along. And then we're also going to get one of these. So then we want one of our 3x4s that's going to look good with this circle on top of it. There'll be a mat in between and look good with this paper. I think I probably don't want to pick this because it's a little too close to the circle. Again, I can go bold and bold. And then the subtle circle. Not sure I like that. I think I'll go with the hearts. So 1 bold pattern and 2 more subtle patterns. We'll put that all away, and then now we need cardstock mats later, but for now we're done with the pattern paper for sketch 6. This is sketch 7. Sketch 7 actually gets these ovals cut in half. Sorry, I should have done this when I did the butterfly paper, but and then it gets 1 of the 3x4s in the center. I'm going to pick from the 2 that only have 2 left because I'm making 2 of this card. Hopefully that made sense. So, ooh, pretty bold again. Probably want something subtler to go with this guy. Hopefully we have something left. So maybe let's go with the subtler hearts. And then we have everything for sketch 7. We're ready to move on and cut the pattern paper that will go with sketches 8 and 9. So these triangles, it does call for a mat for them, but it's only going to go across one side. It will help separate it from the edge of the paper, and you can also choose to skip the mat for those if you want. And this can be directional pattern paper. I happen to have one. That is the one I have left. And I will make sure that it is clear how many pieces can and cannot be directional. Okay. In the workbook especially, but maybe a note in the video description as well. Okay, so I cut it to 3x8, that's in half, and then I'm gonna cut 2 inches off the bottom, so I'll bring it to 6 minus 2, and then I'll bring it to 3, and then This piece is going to be cut on the diagonal and spread across the card. So in that instance, I'm going to need to make sure that the diagonal, when I cut the diagonal, I cut it as shown here in the sketch. If you cut the diagonal the other way, it's not a big deal. You'll just, if you cut the diagonal like this instead of as shown, it simply means when you go to make your card, instead of being in the top left and bottom right, your triangles will instead just be in the top right and the bottom left. I just wanted to note that that was, if you're looking to get the result, or if you cut them wrong and then you're like, hey, what happened? It could just be that, you know, you got a little mixed up there. Okay, so we'll keep doing that for the other half of this paper as well. You're going to need to pick a 3x4 to go with these. The love paper looks like it's going to work out pretty well. We're going to have 4 of these. Oh, I miscounted. That's okay. We're going to pick the love paper for 3 of them because I only have 3 loves left. And then we'll use the really bold. So it'll be like flower on flower. That's probably going to be a lot for some people, but I think it's kind of fun. So 3 of them with love, 1 of them with flower. And then that's all going to go for sketch 8. I'll cut the additional triangles and put them in there with it. But the other thing we're going to need to do is we're going to take these 2 pieces that are 3x2, and these are going to go for sketch 9. You're only making 1 of sketch 9, and you're going to put the pattern, the cardstock mats on them, and they're going to be kind of staggered like this, and then this will go on top. And as you can see, we'll just have floral on floral again, and I think it's okay. I think it actually looks a little less busy because it's floral on floral than it would have if I used it with these bold flowers with the candy paper. So now I have basically all of my pieces. I've sorted all the pattern paper into their envelopes, and we're ready to follow the cardstock mat templates and continue to sort. So the next step in assembling our 20 cards for this class is to cut our cardstock mats. And as I mentioned, if you get the PDF, there is a cardstock cutting mat template. There are several of them. There are 4 different ones, and one of them you're going to cut twice. So you need 5 sheets of the same color, 5 sheets of cardstock. I recommend that they're all the same color, especially the first time you do this, and if you want to follow the cutting templates, but you can mix it up. And if you are, if you have the PDF and you're like, okay, I want blue for this card and green for this card or something like that, you're going to be able to make it work. But if this is your first time doing it, I would recommend picking 5, and that's what I'm going to do just because it's easiest, honestly. So the first piece of cardstock, first template, you cut 2 of, and you're going to cut them to 4 1/4 by 3 1/4 for the mats for all the 3x4s. So they're going to be, the measurements are always in width by height. So you cut it to 3 1/4, but I'm going to cut it to 9 3/4, then 6 1/2, and then 3 1/4, and that will leave me with pieces that are the 3 1/4 inch wide. And then I'm going to have regrets again because I forgot that I should probably cut the smaller piece first, but it's okay. I'm just going to cut it at the 1 inch mark, so that's not terribly hard to do here on my paper trimmer. And then all of these get cut in half again at 4 1/4. And as you can see, this is the only scrap that's left from that whole piece of cardstock, which is pretty good. And then you're going to cut an entire second sheet that same way. And I'm not going to walk you through every little tiny step of this part of the process. So what I'm going to do is cardstock template A. I'm going to cut 2 sheets like this. These 4 1/4 by 3 1/4, you get 1 for each card. So since card sketch 1 makes 2 cards, I put 2 of these inside, and then I move on. And so that's what I'm going to do every time it tells me what card, or what card to put it in. I'm going to put it in its envelope and then go ahead and go to the next thing in terms of getting these 2 pieces done. And then these ones, they say they're for sketch 1 or 4. So 2 of them go in with sketch 1 and the other 2 go in with sketch 4. So with the second sheet, I'll put that in envelope number 4. For cardstock mat template B, There, you're going to cut pieces that are 8 1/4 by 3 1/4. So you do need to trim a little bit off of these. I'll cut my 3 1/4 first. So I have pieces that are 8 1/2 by 3 1/4, and then I'm going to just cut a little 1/4 inch off of each one, creating another, you know, very tiny scrap. You can do things with tiny scraps like that, but I will be honest that I am typically inclined to just recycle those, maybe glue them together and use them to, like, I use them like fake foam tape. So I'll glue layers of cardstock together, and instead of putting foam tape behind things, I'll put that. And I think I'll show you that later in the video. But anyway, then this other piece here, I'm going to cut 2 more 3 1/4 by 4 1/4 mats. But this is where all the circles come from. So I did, and I'll show you all the circles and the ovals come from. This is another scrap, but that one's pretty big and I think could be useful for things. So that's more like, I'd have to get like that big before I start really holding on or being too concerned about things. So I need to take, if I cut my circle pattern paper with this circle die, I need to go 1 up and cut my circle mat with this other die. So I will take 2 of the 3 1/4 by 4 1/4, put a little bit of mint tape down to hold them, and then run those through my die cut machine. And then over here, these longer pieces, these mats I'm going to cut the larger oval out of, which I believe no, that looks way too large. They're all like tangled up here for a second. Am I missing one? Got it. Sorry about that. Okay, so this should be the oval that I need. That is 1 size larger. And we'll cut that out of both of these. Now here you want to be careful because you're going to be covering this hole with your pattern paper, but you do want to have even on each side. If you put it a little too far to the left, when you go to cover it with your pattern paper, you're going to see that cut. So it is a little bit something you have to be like, careful with, but nothing too difficult to do. And this will do that out of each one of these, and then it'll say, hey, put that in sketch 2, put that in sketch 7. And so that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to file those away in my envelopes that we've talked about previously. Template C. We are cutting some more of those 4 1/4 by 3 1/4 and some additional rectangles. So again, we're going to cut one of those 1 per card. So you have gotten some of these out of the first 2 sheets. You got some of them out of the second sheet, and some of them out of the, you need 20 of them. So it really adds up. That's why you're going to see that 4 1/4 by 3 1/4 so often on these cardstock cutting templates. There's many, many places we're using them. So cutting it to 3 1/4 by 4 1/4. File away one and any one that doesn't have it yet, because every single envelope needs as many as the cards it's gonna make. Then this piece that's left over, we're gonna cut it to 3 1/4 wide by 2 1/4 tall. So we'll trim this to 3 1/4. Then it'll be cut in half to 2 1/4. So it's 4 1/2. Now we'll take these 2 pieces and, ooh, I must have mismeasured there. I regret that. Okay, and then these ones need to be 4 1/4 long, but 1 3/4 wide. I know these measurements are a lot, but I do want to say them all out loud because, again, I want you to be able to do this class for free if you want. Although I'm the kind of person who would, I mean, I guess that sounds silly. I would buy it. Well, of course that sounds like of course you would say that. You benefit, right? But I'm the kind of person who I have a hard time with all those measurements, and that's why I really like to share my templates, and they are so often, like, I have over 100 free templates on jesscrafts.com. You don't need to purchase them. You know, it's just occasionally with these classes I'm offering that additional option. Next up, we have Cardstock Cutting Template D. As I previously mentioned, these are rough drafts. So I had a little error here on Cutting Template D. You are going to need 2 more of those 4 1/4 by 3 1/4 inch mats. And then you're going to take these 3 1/4 inch by 3 1/4 inch, so 3 1/4 inch square, and cut them in half mats all out of this piece of paper. And these ones here are for sketch 8. And these ones here are the same 1 per card. Of course, this will all be fixed when you purchase it on Etsy, but I did want to highlight that because it was a little unclear down here what's going on. So we are going to cut again at 9 3/4. We're going to get 6 1/2, and then 3 1/4. I do think I also showed this template earlier in the video, so sorry that there was that error there, but it is fixed by the time you get to instruction, and that is the important thing, and it will be fixed in the final PDF, so you know, there won't be any errors there. So then we're gonna cut those. We have our 2 3 1/4 by 4 1/4. Then we have our 2 3 1/4 by 3 1/4 inch squares. These will then get cut into triangles, so I'll line up this point of the square and the other point kind of in a diamond shape, and then go ahead and cut. Those will go in with sketch 8. I'll continue to do that with all the 3 1/4 inch squares, and then of course the 4 1/4 by 3 1/4 will go in with whatever sketch continues to need it. So now we're going to move into the card assembly. I'm starting with card sketch 1. It has a pattern paper background that is 4 by 5 1/4 with that circle cut out of the center. And then I put adhesive on the back of most of the stuff, and that's what I'll do throughout because I want to save you some time and really focus on the instruction. But when you use a tape runner, you're just gonna kind of run the tape. Usually there's maybe there might be a button you have to push, or just put some pressure down that transfers the tape over. My ATG has a button, other ones just do the pressure of sliding it down. So then you're gonna put this 3/4 by 4 inch pattern paper on top of a 1 by 4 1/4 inch piece of cardstock, then your 4 1/4 by 3 1/4 inch mat, and your 3 by 4 inch piece of patterned paper. You will make 2 of those. I will show you 1 of each when there are multiple cards. Card sketch 2, quite a simple result, but you are using those pieces that you cut the ovals out of. So you might prefer liquid glue for some of these smaller spots, but I don't find it to be too much of a problem to use tape runner. And you can see even if the ovals don't exactly line up, it doesn't matter because I am just going to be covering it with my 3x4. We just need to make sure that I am actually covering it, that I'm placing the rectangle down far enough or over far enough, that kind of thing. And then sticking to my adhesive over there. Okay, and then of course just kind of paying attention to any directionality issues that your paper might have. Card sketch 3 makes 4 cards, so I have 3 of them done. We have a 2 1/4 by 5 1/4 inch piece. The card sketches, if you note, they will even tell you what template they're all from. So you can kind of try to match things back up. I was trying to make it as clear as possible. And then we are going to put the 3 1/4 inch mat, 3 1/4 by 4 1/4, and 3x4 down on top of it. I'm not embellishing any of these cards yet, you might have noticed. And I think, my reason behind doing that is there's going to be some people who just kind of want to know how to make the cards, and then they're happy to do the embellishing on their own. They don't need as many tips or tricks on that portion. They're just like, great, I'll stamp a sentiment on it. Or maybe they were using 3x4 cards that already had a sentiment. They're like, I'm done. So I'm gonna save all the embellishing for the end of the video and just kind of, that's how I broke it up in the last class, and it seemed to work out well. So that is why I'm not showing that. But then that's card sketch 3. As you see, I'll just keep everything again all sorted so that when I go to the next step, I can pull them back out. Card sketch 4, there's just one of it. So I'll assemble it together here. I want to make sure that this strip is a little bit up from the bottom of the card. I don't ever give measurements for like how far up to put it or that kind of thing. It's just for like the sizes of paper and that. So I have these 4 by 3/4 inch strips, and ooh, I must have made some kind of mistake here with my cutting. It's okay. We're actually not even going to notice it because we're going to cover this side. But you have a 4 1/4 by 1 inch mat, and then this one worked out. So it was probably, I mean, it's definitely user error for sure, my mistake on that part, but I must have been too generous with this cut or something like that. But again, we're going to cover it. You maybe going slow helps that kind of thing, but also I can usually make it work, or there's sometimes that, you know, scraps left over to cut another one if you do make a mistake. And then we'll put that 4 by 3 over the 4 1/4 by 3 1/4, and we're ready for embellishment. Sketch 5 is kind of unique because instead of just leaving these straight paper strips, I did cut a little banner into them. So basically what I did was I snipped down the center and then like on an angle from each side to get that banner shape out of them. You do not have to do that. I just thought it added a little bit more interest to the card, and I don't know, like I think it looks cute, but I understand that like maybe for somebody they're like, well, you didn't technically use the whole paper. Totally fine. I get it. You could totally just use the straight strips instead. And also there's some people who just like don't want to cut that because it's a little bit kind of a fussy thing to do, especially if you want them all to like look perfect here at the bottom. Oh, sorry. Perfect here at the bottom. I have a hard enough time lining up things like so that there's an even amount of space in between them, because I think those ones were a little bit different in size. But I am willing to embrace imperfection in my card making. It's a handmade card. It's not a manufactured card. And honestly, a lot of manufactured cards are not perfect either. So something to consider. But I am then going to, so I put these strips, they are 8 by 3/4 inch. And then then I put the 3 by 4 on top. In terms of imperfections on cards, I thought I would point this out. In case you thought I was a professional, I did this one upside down. I cut the banner out of it backwards. I don't even know if anyone else would notice that. Like the hearts are distinctly upside down and the other two are not. It's unfortunate, but most recipients probably wouldn't even notice. Something I might do in this instance to make it maybe look more intentional would be to take the one that's different and put it in the center, and then put the ones that are correct on the outsides, and then like maybe it would look like, yeah, she totally made that as an intentional choice and not, hey, you know, it is what it is. So that is card sketch number 5. All right, we're here at card sketch number 6. It makes 2 of them. We have 1 3/4 by 4 1/4 matte, 1/4 inch smaller for our patterned paper. Our 3 by 4 again, as we usually do. You can put it all the way down at the bottom and make them kind of similar, or if you like it a little bit more like closer to the top. There's a certain amount like within the sketch, do what you like to do, but I show you the sketch in a way that leaves no scraps. But you know, if you want to turn card on its side or something like that, there's some freedom to do that. And some of you, if you've been following me for a number of years, you might notice that some of these sketches, this tutorial looks a little bit familiar. I did a different version of this tutorial years ago, and I took it down because I was just not happy with the way it came out. I didn't think it was clear. You had to use a lot of non-directional pattern paper, which isn't very easily available. It wasn't up to what I wanted it to be. And so I've revamped it. The sketches are somewhat different. It works with, you can use more sheets of directional pattern paper, which is really common in 6x8 pattern paper packs. But I did want to highlight that because there may be some of you who are like, I have a version of this tutorial. I have a version of these sketches. There are some pretty significant differences, but I wanted to acknowledge that. Sketch 7 is a little bit different because you are going to take the oval and cut it in half. So we've pretty much done all of our cutting at this point, and then we have to pull out our paper trimmer one last time for this. So you're gonna stick the patterned paper oval on top of the cardstock oval, and then you wanna cut it exactly in half, and you're going to use half of each side as the embellishment on the card. So you'll wanna make sure that you're using the same half from the other one so they line up. There we go. I mixed mine up because I cut them both at the same time, but you could cut them separately so you don't have that trouble. But even though when you have the oval here and you're cutting it and then swapping it, it shouldn't matter about like your pattern or anything. You shouldn't have to be concerned about that because everything is still facing the way it was originally. It's just on opposite sides. So I just wanted to highlight how that works so that if you had a very special pattern paper, maybe it would matter how you cut it in half and spread it across the paper since it's not directly in half. Since the sides are switched. And then we'll put a little bit of, then we'll put the 3x4 on top of it. Now, I wanted to take a moment and highlight this is where you could use cardstock scraps if you want to. So you have some leftover of this red, you could totally save it for another project, but in instances like this where there's a lot of space underneath and I've used some pretty thick cardstock. This is Spellbinder's Pomegranate is the color I ultimately chose. Like I said, everything's gonna be linked in the video description, so if you did want to discover the products, you could take a little piece of that scrap cardstock and place it behind your larger piece here that doesn't have as much support so that everything lays a little bit more evenly. I find this to usually be pretty minor and not something you have to do, but it is a look that some people like and is a way that you can get a little bit of extra use out of scrap cardstock. Card Sketch 8 is one of the places where if you wanted to skip some mats, I think you could. I mean, that's actually true on a lot of them. But these triangles in the corner, I'm gonna place them down and then the pattern paper goes on top of them. The pattern paper was 3x3, the cardstock was 3¼ by 3¼ and then they were cut on the diagonal. And as you can see, it leaves just that small strip of cardstock mat, just kind of separate things. And while I think that works really well with some papers where, you know, it helps them to stand out from the background, especially if there's a lot of white space. And these ones have a lot of cream, but this still helps. But if you had a really bold pattern paper, you could skip that. And then when you place these on top, it would still be enough to, like, you know, to cover everything. It's kind of hard to describe, but like, I understand that you're using a very small amount of cardstock visible and a lot of it covered up. And while that's true in general about mats, you know, when you're really only seeing one side, it feels even a bit more true. So you could skip those cardstock mats if you prefer. And there will be 4 of that card. I did make sure that the 2 papers that were opposite each other lined up, like they were cut from the same original square. I don't think you'll really notice. I don't think it's a big deal. You can really just use any 2. But if you prefer that kind of thing, you might want to keep them sorted that way or make a moment to be intentional and go back and match them up before you tape them down. Sketch 9 is the last sketch. It only makes one card, and when you've added up all the cards you've made, this would be the 20th card if you were going in order. The first class that I did was 15 Christmas cards or holiday cards in 1 hour. Of course, you can use it for many other things, as previously discussed, but I did want to point out this class is different in that this is not nearly as fast. There's so many cardstock mats, there's so many different sketches and designs. It is not something I anticipate that you would be able to complete in an hour. I think, based off of my experience so far, we're looking at 5 to 6 hours to do it all. And I mean, I think that that is reasonable. For the amount of cards you're going to make. Many people will spend hours on a single card, but if you want to just kind of have a gauge of about how long this might take, it is taking me at least 4 hours. Okay, and then this, oh, I might not have put those close enough together. I got to talking and got distracted. Okay, so you want to place these a little bit closer together here, and then this one on top. So these are 3x2s, and the mats are 1/4 inch bigger, so 3 1/4 by 2 1/4. And then of course, here's our 3x4 that is on every one of the sketches. And that's another great place to use that cardstock to kind of help prop things up if you like. So now I'm ready to embellish my cards. If I'm making a lot of cards like this, it can be really helpful, and especially if you're newer, I might suggest purchasing coordinating embellishments. So I use the Cutie Pie collection from American Crafts, and I picked up the journaling ephemera, which has 72 pieces, and just the regular ephemera, I suppose, isn't anything else, which has 75 pieces, which is probably a lot more than I need today because I'm only making 20 cards, but as you also know, I used 10 of the 36 pieces of patterned paper, so I could certainly make a lot more cards with this collection. I like that there are sentiments included with each, so I might preference finding those over just a, design, like rather than just a cupcake, maybe one that has like this gumball machine, which also has a sentiment on it. Now, these they're not like stickers. So you are gonna still have to add adhesive to the back, and some of them are vellum pieces, which can be a little bit tricky to adhere because you can often see the adhesive behind them. So I probably will just avoid the vellum today so I can keep the class kind of focused on the general idea, which was how to make the cards without scraps. But I did want to call that out for those of you who are like, I don't want to deal with embellishment pieces or vellum embellishment pieces. And then a lot of them have some shine to it, which is pretty fun. And so I put these in some scrapbook.com stack and sort trays. These are the larger size, just so that I could kind of move them around without getting a bunch lost on my desk. There are also quite a few that you could add a stamped sentiment to, like this one here. Any ones that are kind of shiny like that probably won't take ink very well, or you should use something like a StazOn ink, which does not smear, but a typical dye ink would probably not stick to a shiny surface like that. One more thing I wanted to point out, this is really only relevant to these, but they do have perforations so that you can like fold it back and tear them apart, similarly to the strips on the top of the papers were perforated and you could have torn off those strips. I personally do not like that look. I would just come in with scissors, but if you were purchasing this collection because you saw it demonstrated, I wanted to be clear that like that is why my edges look smooth, and you're like, hey, mine didn't have a smooth edge. It's because I made that modification, and here I even have to like the one side is pointy and the other side is kind of rounded from manufacturing. So I will be doing little adjustments like that, and I didn't want anyone to feel like they didn't get the whole truth about them. So I went through, I put aside some of my favorite embellishments and sentiments from the pack. I am leaning currently away from any of the more lovey-dovey type sentiments. I mean, they're just like, I love you or XO or things like that, just because I'm not giving these to my partner. So you know, or like, I mean, obviously you could, for your kid, you could have an I love you or whatever. But if I donate a lot of my cards. There is a page on jesscrafts.com all about like places that you can donate cards. And so, you know, I wouldn't be saying I love you to somebody I don't even know. But if you're like, sometimes you can send cards away that then people can use to give to their loved ones. And in that case, you know, something like that might make more sense. So I'm just going to kind of show you a little bit of my embellishment picking process and talk about it. But basically I'm switching to liquid glue here because I think that will make this process go a bit faster, since if I were to kind of get out my larger adhesive, trying to get some adhesive on some of these tinier things is actually a little bit tricky. So I like to switch to liquid glue. That's why I said it's an optional supply. I think you could do the entire thing with tape runner or the entire process with liquid glue if either one of those is your strong preference. And so here I'm doing things like, oh, you know, there's blue in the background. I could pull blue into my embellishments, for instance. And I am probably preferencing a little bit using the ones that have sentiments. On busier papers like this, I think it can be a little more challenging. So I would probably pick, like this one, it's florals on florals, and it actually doesn't have a ton of color in it. There's quite a bit of neutral, but also something that maybe had a lot of, like this has a pretty strong white border around it, so it really pops off of that busy background. So this might be a good candidate as well. I don't think that all of these, as I mentioned at the beginning of class, I don't think you need to put a sentiment on all of these. I think they're pretty clearly Valentine's Day in many cases, or not. You know, then you could just use, if I don't say Happy Valentine's Day or something like that on the front, then I can maybe use it like this could be an anniversary card, because there's nothing super Valentine-y about it. It's just very lovey. And pretty similarly here too. Honestly, these last two, like you could send those any time of year. Yes, they have hearts, but I actually sometimes like to avoid a sentiment that's too clearly one way or the other for that reason. I'm noticing there's this orange behind him, and I feel like there's no orange in this paper pad. I mean, maybe, like even this one that had all the plaid colors, I'm not really seeing the orange. So, but I do like that, like there's a bug, a bee to go with the butterflies. And that one does say, I love you just because. I just thought it was really cute. So, you know, I don't have to donate all of my cards, but, and then something like this, I would probably pair with a smaller embellishment. And that's why, even though it's like, oh yeah, there's 75 embellishments or something in a particular paper pack, there's going to be some cards where you'll want to use more than one, so it's going to be okay to, you know, have multiple of each of the, or to have many different ones. This needs another heart, I feel like, but then I'm a little hesitant to make it, well, I don't know. I mean, it pulls in the green. Maybe it kind of makes sense because there's two of them. These heart faces are not my favorite. They don't read as cute to me as they might to some people. I'm leaning towards I don't know. I wouldn't call them creepy, but like they're not my favorite. That's all. And this is a great time to pop things up. So this kind of thing, I'm like, this is perfect. It's such a neutral card. You know, yeah, it's got the hearts on it or whatever, but we could be using this for anything. So I'm certainly inclined to maybe pull in some less the super Valentine-y things. Like, you know, if I put this here, I could totally put a happy birthday sentiment on this sometime in the future and make it work. So sometimes I'll even like leave room for an embellishment for the future. I know a lot of other people do that too. They're like, you know, I make cards because I have a certain paper in mind that I really like, but I don't completely finish them until I actually know what I want a card for. So, sorry, I think I kind of lost my train of thought. I was sharing something else earlier, but again, we'll just leave some room. I think sometimes it's interesting if an embellishment is not always just centered. Like this one, I'm placing it a little bit off the edge of the patterned paper so that it looks a little bit more dynamic, like it's coming in from the side rather than just being sort of smack dab in the center. I like all the cars that this came with. I think cars, like the kind of cars love bug thing, is somewhat popular for Valentine's Day, but it's nice because you know, you get a lot of stuff with like florals and butterflies, and those are in this collection, but there's some other stuff too, and I like a good variety. This trucks, Spellbinders had a whole set of like truck die cuts that you could put different things into. I've seen stamp sets like that. Those are pretty fun. That one's maybe a little more Valentine-y. I also do try to consider, like, so if there are embellishments that only go with some of the papers, like this has music notes on it. Most of the papers in the collection don't, and there is this musical embellishment here, then I'm probably going to want to stick it on one of my music papers, because if I don't and I, you know, hold on to it too long, it might come to the point where it feels a little out of place. I mean, music's a pretty general theme, so it's not the most important one of those, but just wanted to highlight why, again, like why I might make this decision or that decision. These are actually, they come out of the frame, so you can punch them out, but I put a little bit of tape on the back of them so that they could stay with their frames, because I like them that way. And you'd have to want to, or if you want to put a little bit of, make sure you get some adhesive on that frame piece as well. Another example where you could add in a sentiment later, or this "You're Sweet" be pretty perfect even right away. As you can see, I don't spend very much time thinking about any one card. This one in particular, I'm like, well, love is not technically a sentiment on here, but I'm not going to add an additional sentiment because I'm going to find that distracting to have, you know, words on words on words. So this is, to me, a good instance where I probably would not add, although I guess it does say love bug on the license plate there. But, you know, when would I consider especially not adding an additional sentiment, or what would especially maybe not need an additional sentiment, and might be when I have a paper that has some words already on it. Now you can also add some mats behind some of your embellishments to make them stand out more, but what I did notice is quite a few of these where they either have like color around the decoration, or they have white around it. And either way, that kind of helps it to pop off and acts like a mat. So I often think it's not needed, but I understand, like on that circle, you could give it a lot more presence on the paper by adding a circle. So if it felt like, if your embellishment ever feels a little small for your card, adding a solid circle or a pattern circle like this here, I'm like, okay, well, I'm probably not going to put a big embellishment on it because then I'm just going to lose my circle. But this is a time when if I had a smaller embellishment like this cupcake, now it's not drowning so much on the card because it has that still a little small, honestly, in my opinion. This one is vellum, so I won't use it because it won't really pop off, but that sort of scale. So it kind of can help you to change up and get maybe a little more use. Oh, here's a cute one because that kind of ties in the candy theme, although it's not very noticeable because it's pink on pink. Oh no. See, this is where I'm gonna, if I pause too long, then I start overthinking it. So we're gonna stop. We're not overthinking it. We are going ahead and gonna get some of those cupcakes on there. Okay, and I have just a few more cards to go. I saved my busiest cards for last because, you know, who doesn't like a good challenge? This ant though, he stands out pretty well. He does have some yellow in it, and there's no yellow anywhere else on it. This is a pretty large embellishment, but he feels like he's dry. I actually think the yellow makes it so that you notice it and it doesn't get drowned out, where a lot of the embellishments will get lost on that busy paper. Of course, again, always just feel free to take some of that scrap of red and cut yourself a little square or something to put your embellishment on. There are plenty of larger embellishments in the packs, like these tags, or just even this plain heart, which can help kind of ground things. So there's quite a bit. I would probably say, you know, with 70 something pieces, although some of them are quite small, you probably don't need to buy both packs to use up your embellishments with one pack of patterned paper. So something like this too, what I might do is, like, since I'm not gonna, you could of course write a love note on it. Sometimes I will, you know, do something where like I cover part of it, or I guess not so much that. Like, you know, this is not a great example, but covering part of those sentiments can certainly help out a lot too. Okay, this has a lot of neutral space. And then I think it would look really cute with a sentiment layered on top of it. I probably want it to hang off a little bit, like that. One last card to embellish. Oh, I'm at 12 minutes of embellishing. Oh no, I better speed it up. These ones, great for stamping a sentiment. So I said there's an optional get a small sentiment stamp set, and it's because I would use it on a lot of these. But sometimes it's nice to keep the supplies really minimal to encourage new crafters that they don't have to buy everything in the craft aisle in order to make cards. Because I think sometimes we feel that way when we first get started, like, oh, there's just so much to get, and, you know, oh, this crafter, you know, they use 20 different supplies on their card, I gotta have them all, and I try to limit how much I make anyone feel that way by showing you how you can do some things with minimal supplies. I made a second set of winter cards with the same instructions and all the same procedure, except for this time I had one of the papers that had those 3x4 cut apart. So you can see in a lot of those areas, I didn't have to add much embellishment. A few of them I still had to, but I wanted to kind of show this alternative because I think there's gonna be a lot of you out there who have a 6x8 paper pad with these 3x4 cut aparts, and you'll see that it makes this process really simple and you can really speed up the process. And I wanted to also just make sure that, you know, you see that it's not just Valentine's cards. It can be absolutely adapted to whatever theme you need. We made 20 cards, in this case Valentine cards, without any patterned paper scraps, and you can see very unique. We have like, even though there's a couple repeats or whatever, you know, the embellishments add a lot to them. We can mix our different patterned papers, and I hope that you learned something and had a lot of fun with this class. Again, you can purchase the PDF that goes with the class so that you can have all of those templates and measurements. You can know exactly how to cut your cardstock if you didn't want to write it all down during the presentation, and that'll be available at the Jess Crafts Etsy shop, which there will be a link to the PDF and a coupon code so that you can pick that up. I hope that you have fun, and I would of course love to see the cards that you make with this tutorial. Thank you so much for joining me. Again, there's a whole other free class too, and there's many videos on my channel here at YouTube at Jess Crafts that will show you how to make cards without pattern paper scraps using 12x12, 6x6, 6x8, 8x8 pattern paper. I'll do slimline cards, A2 size cards, 5x7 cards. I love all kinds of cards. I love all kinds of pattern paper. I love celebrating seasons and donating my cards, so I make a whole bunch. And if that sounds like something that you want to do, please subscribe down below, and I will see you in another video. Bye!